this session is really about encouraging the people within the electoral districts to form NGOs, form action groups, start to build, you know, I want to put it, a reputation for doing stuff in the area that you like, right? The groups within the community, the village councils, whatever group, they would be able to access funding from this community participatory budget. So that is something to look forward to in the upcoming months, you know, in the upcoming term. So start forming groups. That's my advice to my electorate and others, right? But I'd like to introduce Mr. Barry Lovelace. He's our first speaker for this afternoon. Barry Lovelace, right? He's in his professional life, he's an experienced environmentalist in the non-governmental organizations sector. He worked with Environment Tobago for 8 years. He worked with Boca Reef Trust for 10 years. Presently, he's doing voluntary work with Corbin Local Wildlife Park and Tobago ARC. That's a new community-oriented NGO. He's an educator, a part-time lecturer at the University of Southern Caribbean, right? He has his MSc in Natural Resource Management, his bachelor's in biology, and NGO Management Certificate from St. Augustine, UAE.
Pleasant good evening to the constituents of Bagatelle, Bacolet, right? And I want to thank the representative, Assemblyman Nathisha Charles-Pantin, for this invite to share some ideas about the benefits of NGOs, right, to the Tobago space. Right? I'm excited to do that this evening. Right? I also want to acknowledge my esteemed colleague, Ms. Nathisha Charles-Pantin, right, who is a longtime friend and colleague of mine in the environmental conservation work. You know, she's a recognized stalwart for her life contribution in that field, actually. Right, so Pat, you're there. Feel free to you know, chime in whenever, and I'm sure when the question and answer, you'll even have more to say. Right, question and answer. Right, so it's there.
Yes.
Right, so I have a short period to say a lot of things, right, on the benefits. And when I'm talking about the benefits, I want to talk about it in the context of the role and importance of NGOs and CBOs in the Tobago space, right? And who was it? I think I got the name here, Renelle. You know, in her contribution, you know, she songs as if, well, soon, Nathisha, there's going to be well, I don't know what you call it, but a beautification NGO in your district, I'm sure, after this presentation, started by Renelle and her and others. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, you know, the events of the last couple of years have convinced me, right, that indeed a new era has dawned on this world. Right? And that is even true within our local space. Right? Because in a sense, Tobago has pressed what you call the proverbial reset button, right, from that last campaign we saw there. Now, the civil society that constitutes Tobago have expressed a resounding resolve to do things differently. That is what I saw. A resolve to deviate from the insanity of doing the same thing repeatedly, yet expecting a different result. Isn't that what the definition for insanity? One of them? Right?
Correct.
And so here we are. We have a clean, fresh slate. And I don't think the slate could get fresher than it is. Right? So as a civil society, we must now exert our collective creativity to chart a new course. And in Nathisha's opening there, I mean, she's hard at work trying to make this happen, right? But you can see it's a lot of work. She cannot do it alone. The THA cannot do it alone, right? However, this different way of working, this different way of governance has to be an improved way of doing things. Now, we cannot anticipate that this challenge would be an easy one. It would not, right? Because if you, in fact, all change like this type, it's always an uneasy or an uneasy experience. It takes you out of your comfort zone, as I'm sure Nathisha Pantin, that you are experiencing now. I'm sure you're way out of your comfort zone, but I'm sure in time you'll catch a rhythm and things will settle and so forth. Because we need you inside there alive and well to be able to do things, to make changes, right? But yes, and especially considering the current outlook of the global landscape. I mean, I don't know if you all have been paying attention to global issues. When you look at the economy, dismal. We talk about environmental issues and concerns. They are urgent. You talk about societal, the state of society. It's very unstable. You look at protests and all sorts of things happening all over the place. Too much to mention. Now, how can we respond in Tobago to these foreseeable challenges? Now, when I think of those challenges, the themes that readily come to my mind are these. I think of survival. What is the capacity or the capability of the population in Tobago to survive the times to come? I think of resilience. How can we build resilience for what is to come? The resilience against climate change and the impacts of climate change. Resilience against pandemics. I think someone has a mic open. Check on it, right? Against climate change and, you know, impending diseases such as COVID and what else is to come, you know? I also think of self-sufficiency. And, you know, when I think of self-sufficiency, the first thing that comes to my mind is food security. So that's one of the most basic needs when one talks about being self-sufficient. And of course, you talk about food security, you talk about agriculture, you talk about environment. Isn't that your department? Yes, so your responsibility, I think, within the THD is one of, if not the most important, is one of the most important responsibilities you have been put up on your shoulders. But I mean, we've worked together before. I know you will make things happen. Right? I know that. So that said, all communities must now find ways of organizing and cooperating to survive and even prosper. Communities have to organize. Now, one medium through which communities could accomplish this cooperation is by organizing through NGOs, or what we call non-governmental organizations, or CBOs, community-based organizations, as was mentioned earlier. And so in that regard, I must commend Mrs. Pantin for recognizing the value of NGOs or the NGO sector in building a society, in building societal capital. Right? So what is an NGO? Just to have, I want to just do a quick overview of what an NGO is, such that we can understand what we're talking about. Now, while the term NGO, non-governmental organization, while it may have various interpretations, the term is generally accepted to include non-profit, private organizations that operate outside of government control or outside of government influence. Right? Now, NGOs generally tend to further the visions and goals of their members, right? And their goals cover a wide range of issues. For example, improving the natural environment, and this is what I heard from Renel, right? She spoke about the community coming together to beautify streets in Scarborough. That's a possibility. Encouraging the observance of human rights. Right now, we're in a time where, there's mandates and, infringement. There's a lot of talk about infringement of human rights and so forth. I'm sure some of you on the call right now are experiencing some kind of pressures as it regards to your human rights. Right? Improving the welfare of the disadvantaged, the poor in the society, the disabled in the society. All of these are issues around which communities can organize and make a difference. Now, initially, I'm sure many of you may think that your experience with NGO has been minimal. However, if you consider some of these more familiar groups like the Boys Brigade, Scouts, 4-H, Pathfinders, Cooperative, and even your local church or places of worship for those in mosques and temples, right? And the extent to which these sort of organizations impact your daily life. All these forms of associations fall under the umbrella of NGOs or non-governmental organizations. And yes, they play an important role in most communities. Now, there are some similar terms that you would hear, right? Similar but different in, they have slight nuances in the terms, but generally, they are NGOs. You hear terms like the third sector organization, non-profit organizations, NPO, voluntary organization, civil society organization, grassroots, social movement, private or voluntary, self-help. And I boil that one because I think that one is something we need to get really familiarized with. Self-help organizations. And again, I reference Renel's contribution in that regard. Non-state actors, all of these terms refer to that same sector, that third sector. Right? An organization may be correctly labeled as an NGO if it has these 4 characteristics. And this is now coming information from the Commonwealth Foundation. If it has these 4 characteristics. 1, voluntary. It's voluntary. NGOs are formed voluntarily by citizens, right? With an element of participation in the organization. And it could be a small body as well. There are large NGOs with lots of members. So it varies. Then you have independent. And I mentioned that already. It's independent of government, of course, within the laws of the society, right? But it's controlled by those who formed the organization or who were elected or appointed to form. And normally you'd have a board and so forth that will govern the organization. And all of this would be captured into legal instruments that are based on the freedom, on your rights to associate, the freedom of association, right? And the freedom to assemble. Those are human rights that they are based upon. Right? Then the third characteristic, which is an important one and much misunderstood one, that is a not-for-profit. Right? It's not for profit, meaning NGOs are not for private personal profit or gain. Right? So if you're looking to get rich working for an NGO, that's not the case. And I can testify to that. Right? You've heard my thing, I've worked most of my life for NGO, so I'm not rich. However, there are many other benefits, right, that you can derive from working for an NGO, right? And you don't have to work for an NGO to contribute to an NGO either. Well, I'll touch on that a little bit at the end, right? But I won't go into the benefits of working for an NGO right now. Could probably maybe in the question if you want that answered, right? However, within the formation of an NGO, right? Like most enterprises, NGO may have employees who are paid for what they do, right? So, right? And then you have the board. On the board level now the board members are not usually paid for work they perform as board members, but they may be reimbursed for expenses that they occur in the course of performing board duties, which is reasonable. Or if it is that they are functioning on projects within the organization, then they are paid for whatever they bring to the table by way of their expertise. Right? But it's not like where you have shareholdings and so forth, and every profit you make a cut and so forth. Nothing like that. And 4, they are not self-serving. They are not self-serving in their aims and their related values. So the aim of NGOs are to improve the circumstances and the prospects of people and to act on the concerns and the issues that are detrimental to people's well-being and circumstances, right? So those are the 4 characteristics that sort of defines an NGO. Now, in terms of the types of NGOs that you can have, the classification of NGOs, well, the World Bank has 2 broad groups in which they classify NGOs. You have the operational type NGO, and what that means is kind of project-based. These types of NGO, they focus mainly on, the design and implementation of development projects. Right, so you see all those things Nathisha mentioned at the front, the street lights and the garbage, collection and so forth. You could form NGOs to deal with those kinds of things, right? Those are developmental NGOs. And then you have, on the other hand, the advocacy type NGO, right? Which they now tend to focus on advocating for policy, to influence public policy, right? However, there are some interchanging because a lot of NGOs do a little of both. They might focus on the operation, but they might do a little advocacy from time to time in the area of their interests. And as well, you may have an advocacy NGO who from time to time will help the people who they are advocating for by way of projects. So it's not a hard and fast rule. Now, also, NGOs are sometimes classified by the level of operation, which will indicate the scale at which the organization works. So you could have a local NGO, they just have local interests, like you could form an NGO just specific to the issues in Bagatelle, Bacolet, right? Or you could have an interest where it's regional, it becomes regional or national, or even international, right? So depending on the scale of your interest. So that covers it generally. Now, the role and importance of NGOs. Now, organizations usually belong to one of 3 sectors in society, right? However, for a society to achieve its full potential, all 3 sectors must collaborate. And what are these sectors that I'm referring to? Now, each of them have their strengths. Each has their weaknesses in providing citizens with what they need. So you have the government or the public sector, it's termed as. And this sector normally deals with drafting and enforcing laws, constructing and managing public infrastructure, public institutions, providing public goods and services. And of course, we depend on governments to defend the society's sovereignty and the borders, right? So that is government. The other sector, which you call the second sector, is the for-profit or the private business sector. And this sector is best at delivering goods and services. However, it is driven by the interests of the shareholders within the organization. It's capitalistic. So they are driven to make profit because they're getting a cut of the profit personally, right? So this is the private sector. But then you have the third sector. And in fact, those 2 sectors that I mentioned, most people understand them well. But this third sector, the NGO sector, which consists of non-governmental organizations, provides services that the business community nor the government sector are unwilling or unable to provide. And they provide a venue, they further provide a venue for citizens to come together and be heard on the issues that they feel are important. So if you see the diagram there, that Venn diagram is representing that you have the three sectors, the public, private, and civil organization, and then you have the overlaps, right? The overlaps is where I think is lacking, because if you see on the top where public sector and private sector overlap, you hear a lot of times you hear government talking about public-private partnership. That's the overlap they are talking about. So that's understood. The public service and the private sector often cooperate, often. But then there's this other sector below that is somewhat undervalued, that third sector, undervalued and underdeveloped in the Tobago space, and can bring such a difference to social capital. And given where the world is and where it's going, we need to activate, mainstream, bring to prominence the third sector in the Tobago space, right? Where we can have public sector and civil sector collaborating, as well as private sector and civil society collaborating for community economic development. Right? I hope that's clear there. So to summarize the roles, beyond providing services, right? Because I said that the NGOs provide services that the other two sectors cannot or are unwilling to provide. Beyond that, there's another very important function that NGOs provide, and that is as a facilitator to citizens' participation in their societies. So you as an individual, it will be very difficult for you to influence any kind of policy or do anything on your own. But if you are part of an interest group, an NGO, you now have a voice, right? NGOs enable all voices of common interest to be heard. NGOs often aim to promote understanding between citizens and the state, the government. NGOs contribute to a civil society by providing a means for expressing and actively addressing the varied and complex needs of society. NGOs advance science and thought in terms of art and culture, protecting the environment, and support all activities and concerns that make up for a very vibrant civil society. NGOs also motivate citizens in all aspects to act rather than depend on state, on the state power for for everything. And I was happy to hear, and I keep repeating, well, she was the only one that made such a contribution, Renelle, making that suggestion of wanting to act in collaboration with the state to beautify her community, right? NGOs also create an alternative to centralized state agencies and provide services with greater dependence and flexibility. And here's where we can talk about things like co-governance, right? Where communities can be managing certain state resources in some sort of co-government arrangement, right? And the last one there, NGOs establish the mechanisms by which government and the market, which is the private sector, can be held accountable by the public, right? So oftentimes the NGO that acts as the watchdog for a lot of issues, environmental issues, social issues, and so forth in the community, right? So in summary, why are NGOs important? Well, the short answer is NGOs increase social capital by providing people with opportunities to build trust in each other and the capacity to work together towards common goal. And I just want to end with just a few thoughts on the NGOs in the Tobago context and encouragements, right? Where do we go from here? Now that the representative for Bagatelle, Bacolet, is here recognizing the role and importance of the third sector to build civil capital is highly commendable. Right? And it's a good signal. I would want to encourage greater engagement of NGOs, and I'm talking here by the THA, all not your department alone, Mrs. Nathisha Pantin, but all the divisions should seek to engage NGOs, right, and help provide an enabling environment for communities to organize into NGOs. In fact, probably you all should have a department specific to that, right, helping NGOs formulate and guide that process. Right? And there are many ways to accomplish, to encourage, to accomplish this kind of engagement. Now, there are too many to mention in this forum, but just to mention one example. For example, co-management arrangements. I remember some years ago, I was involved with an NGO, a newly formed NGO in Speyside Rangers, and they had this whole idea to manage Little Tobago, because there's a building out there, could act as a sort of a museum of sorts, right? And they were willing to, but the empowering infrastructure just was not there to make it happen. But that is something that would happen, a co-management arrangement where they are managing the thing, they're making, creating employment and livelihood opportunities, right? And for the state's property. And there are many examples I can give like that, right? But to the individuals who are listening here, because I don't want to go on too long, right? You too could get involved. In fact, some of you may already belong to an NGO, but my suggestion to you is now it's time to revive it, right? Look at that vision and mission again, dust it off, refine it in the context of what is happening now, and get up and going. Those of you who are not associated with an NGO, seek out a cause or causes that you would be happy to support. And there are many, many and various ways by which you can contribute to building that third sector and thereby contributing to the prosperity of Tobago. You can give of your time, your expertise, your time and talent, right? You may have skills that you could use within an NGO. You can contribute in kind, resources in kind, or you can contribute financial resources as well, right? There are many ways, right? So with that, I just want to say, let us rally around the third sector as we build, and I borrow in a line here, the best little island the world has ever seen. Sister Nathisha?
I agree.
Yes.
I agree. But I have just a few questions.
Yes, go ahead.
Tobago ARC, Tobago ARC, this is a new NGO. I'd like you to speak about it just a little bit as to what ARC, what, any projects that you all started or,
Right, well, this Tobago ARC, and I have Patricia Turpin here, who is also one of the trustees of the Tobago ARC organization. Right, so you could chime in. Tobago ARC, it stands for Tobago Alliance for Resilient Communities. And each of those words have significance. Tobago Alliance, because it's about partnership, building partnerships, as I was just talking there, collaborating, right? For resilient, right? I spoke about resilience. We are now in a survival economy. We need to be resilient for resilient communities. And the vision of this organization is we see a place, or rather a Tobago, where the planet, or our planet, I should say, where our planet and its people prosper in perpetuity. It's plain and peace, right? But the perpetuity talks about, it refers to sustainable development or creating a cyclical economy where there's very, very little waste, right? And conservation of resources, right? And that's the kind of thinking that we have. But the thing is, there's an emphasis on livelihood because, and I mean, there are NGOs. I've been a part of Buku Reef Trust for 10 years. I've been a part of Environment Tobago for 8 years, right? And there's often a slant on one of the three pillars. You know, you have the three pillars: environment, economy, society, right? Those two organizations I work with, there was a heavy slant towards environment, but I'm seeing where communities are in great need, right? And in terms of livelihood, yes, we stress on environmental stewardship, environmental protection, right? But communities need to organize in terms of how can we use the environment or benefit from the environment in such a way we keep it intact or even improve it and leave it intact for other generations, right? So that's a little bit about what the organization is about. Well, we are in the process of we haven't launched yet fully, right? We're hoping to have a soft launch later on this month or early next month, right? And, you know, and by then we should have a public face in terms of our website and so forth. And people can even contact and join, you know, contribute in whatever ways. We have a system where we have advisors and partners. If you think you have skills that you can bring to the table, you have project ideas that you want to develop, right? Let's talk, develop these projects, find the funding to do them, or even because remember, I didn't touch much on it in terms of how NGOs are funded, but typically NGOs such as the ones I've mentioned have been funded by external funding, where we write projects to whoever donor agencies, and they like the project, they give them funding to do the project. But those type of fundings are drying up. Those global fundings are drying up or being diverted to other areas of the world, right? They are drying up on our side. So we now have to think creatively, right? And the way to go, I see it, is in the area of what we call social enterprise, right? Social enterprising, where we organize businesses, cooperatives, you know, around things that we need, agriculture and these kinds of things, so that we can sustain ourselves. I don't know if I'm making sense there. There's a lot to say in a short time, you know, so I'm trying to be as economic with words as possible.
All right, no, you're making sense.
I don't know if Pat has anything to add. Right? Yes.
Pat, all right. In terms of village councils, do you think that they have been effective over the years, and would you encourage the village to organize themselves along those lines?
Yes. Well, the first part of the question, in terms of the effectiveness, I don't think that they have been as effective as the intention of the intention behind forming village councils. I don't think they have fulfilled that purpose to its fullness, right? And what typically happens, you know, the village council gets too mired in terms of the politics, you know, the government politics, you know, and that affects it, you know. So there needs to be a kind of cutting away, but and that has to be a deliberate effort on the part of the government, if you understand. So the government must be intentional about depoliticizing village councils, right? To make them more community-based, more involved, community involved, so that all parties within the community will feel safe participating in the village councils. But yes, that is a direct channel through which I think the THA can start to push that sort of community organizing, right? But as I said, they have to be intentional about depoliticizing the village councils. Huh?
That was a very good job, Barry.
Well, thank you, Pat. Right?
I can only add that Tobago ARC is a new organization, and we are working deliberately and hard to get it on the road. We are already in discussion with 3 partners for various types of projects, which are marine, some are marine based, but we want the whole village and community to be involved in these projects. We are trying to build people's resilience. This is the thing that is needed now urgently.
Yeah.
And we are going to basically be depending on what is known as the Tobago, the United Nations Man and the Biosphere,
Right.
which was a label put onto Tobago, which it draws a bubble around the island that extends from Mariah in a big circle around the north. So that is where we will be basically stationed, but not what we are only going to be doing. We are going to be island-wide based, but our home base will be in Charlottesville. So we are looking forward to everybody joining us.
Yes.
Anybody who wants to partner, who wants to advise. We don't have members. Okay? We have a trustee board, and we'll be extending that board slightly because we don't want to get top heavy. Okay, so we look forward to working with people throughout the island in all the communities in the years to come.
Yes.
And as soon as possible. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Pat.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ms. Pat Turpin. Thank you very much, Mr. Lovelace. Excellent presentation. I'm hoping that you get members from my electoral district. I would love it.
Well, certainly. Well, I should mention we are partners with Corbin Wildlife, and that's in your district. Yes.
Yes. Right. I'm looking forward to my constituents being part of your organization, because I'm seeing where I'm in a group with a lot of young people. They are really interested in forming an NGO, but they actually need the technical support. They need that.
Well, I didn't talk much to that in terms of how you go about. That might be another session. That might be a kind of specific session to, in terms of how you go, because I know people would need assistance there, walking through the whole process with the Registrar General and what are the requirements and these kinds of things. So those processes, you could always formulate a forum specific to that. Yes. Yeah.
And if their objectives are in line with yours, then they can also join your.
Yes, certainly. Yes.
Right. So that is also a window of opportunity for them. Right. So I'm looking forward to your group seeing the launch of Tobago Arc, and I'll be encouraging the persons in my electoral district to reach out to your organization to join and be part of that change.
Yeah, absolutely interested in young people.
Yes.
Youth is important to us.
Yes. Yes. I could give my number if anybody wishes to chat further. They might have some
yes, please. I'm interested.
Okay, so thank you very much, Barry. I want to thank everyone for attending today's meeting. We're going to have many town hall meetings. Not everyone will be in my meeting virtually. Sometimes I have to go into the community and keep little meetings with people by the block. But all of that is in effort to organize the community in a way that we can take care of ourselves and to ensure that we get full participation from everyone in the community, right? So it's 7 o'clock. I took you all a whole 30 minutes over the time that I allotted for this, but I know it was worth it, and I'll see you again soon, and Barry and Ms. Turpin and everyone. Hope to see you guys soon in my next town hall meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, did I give the number?
Yeah, I think you did, but give it again.
365-4557. 365-4557. I put it in the chat as well.
365-4557. Right? So definitely, I know Mr. Eastman and many others will be contacting you from here on. All right?
Okay, good night.
Good night, everybody. All right, bye.
Good night, everyone.
All right.
All the best to everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you, Mrs. Pantin.
No problem.